This is Joel, and in this video we'll talk about Cisco Umbrella, right? A quick note, I have actually done a couple of videos on Umbrella a while back. You can actually get onto my channel and you can see under the security section you'll find the cloud security playlist, and under that you can probably find a couple of videos on Umbrella where we have talked about DNS and the secure internet gateway. But these videos, I would say, were a bit concentrated more on the labs, right? How do you get your hands dirty? But in today's in today's session, or in today's lecture, we'll actually do a quick whiteboard session, right? We just want to put all the various components and all the various capabilities of Umbrella in one single place and quickly do a like a quick brainstorm or a quick look at the whole capabilities of Umbrella. That's like the agenda for this particular video, right? Cool. Let's not waste any more time. Let's quickly get to so if you look at Umbrella, right, they have put up a very nice documentation which calls out the various packages which are available, right, for people to procure, for organizations to procure. And you can see here on the bottom it lists all the capabilities which Umbrella has to offer, and on the right hand side you can see the packages, right? So there's DNS packages and then is SIG packages, right? So I think they have still kept it segmented because there might be some customers who probably just want the DNS layer security. So in that case they would go for the first two, whereas if you want a much more full-fledged cloud security solution, then you would go for the SIG, right? Similarly, if you want to do something on the SASE space and so on, then SIG is going to be your way, right? As you see on the right hand side, as you look at the SIG, it has more capabilities clearly, but when you look at the DNS security, it's understood. As you see here, some of the cloud firewall and the secure web gateway and some of the features are not fully enabled on the DNS side, and that is expected, right? Good. Now that we have covered that, the other part which I also want to kind of bring out here is that Umbrella has a pretty nice documentation, right? If you go down to docs.umbrella.com, you can basically see the documentation is quite different from how the normal Cisco config guides are. You can see everything related to Umbrella in one single place here. You have the DNS guide, you've got the SIG guide, and you've got literally everything what you configure inside Umbrella available over here, right? So you can probably have a look at the guide while probably listening to this video as well, right? So yeah, that's good. Where do we start, right? So let me get on to my whiteboard now. Let's start with what is Umbrella and why do we need it, right? So when Umbrella started off, it was obviously I think you would have heard of it as well. It was called as OpenDNS, right? It was a company which Cisco acquired, and back in the day it was just a recursive DNS server, right? I think from the name itself, that's pretty much self-explanatory. It was just a DNS server, and over the years when they started building Umbrella product, right, it used to be, or they started with DNS protection, all right, or DNS security, right? What you could do basically was you will have to point all your DNS traffic to Umbrella, and on the Umbrella you will have to or you were able to create some policies, right? Do you want to permit some of the DNS requests, or do you want to block some of them? As simple as that, right? So that's where it started. But I think over the last couple of years, you might have heard about this industry term which has gotten very prevalent. It's called a SIG, Secure Internet Gateway, right? So over the last couple of years, what has happened is that obviously the product which was providing DNS security, right, they have added in quite a lot of features to make it into a full-fledged cloud security solution, right? And a typical SIG, right, has some of the peculiar components which are nothing but your proxy, you have a cloud firewall, you have DLP, you have CASB, and so on. So all these things are generally bundled together and sold as SIG, right? So that is where we are right now, right? So when you look at Umbrella, when you talk about Umbrella, you call it a SIG, Secure Internet Gateway. Now, why is this even prevalent? Or over the last couple of years or last 2-3 years, why has SIG become very prevalent? The reason is, I've talked about this, or I've touched about this during my SD-WAN series as well. right? In the traditional model, you used to have your headquarters and you used to have your branch here, right? And the branch used to backhaul all the traffic to the headquarters, and your firewall used to reside here, right, on the headquarters. So the traffic used to get inspected here before heading out to the internet, right? But now we have actually reached, or we have a lot of cloud adoption, right? Because of which what's happening? You have all your services deployed on the cloud, right? You have Office 365, you have Google, you've got your you've got your typical cloud infra like AWS, Azure, and most of the people are deploying workloads on the cloud infra, right? And you have thousands and thousands of SaaS applications which people and users use all around the world, right? Even a simple notebook application is a SaaS application. I mean, whatever I'm drawing, it's a OneNote, right? I'm using OneNote here. Even OneNote itself is a SaaS application. So everything is on the cloud, right? So when that is the case, is it still needed for us to, let me just grab this, is it still needed for us to do this, right? Why can't we just send the traffic all the way to the cloud via the internet? Why do you have to backhaul it back to headquarters using, say, things like MPLS, right? You can directly use DIA, direct internet access, something which we talked about in SD-WAN, right? So you can use some of the cool capabilities of SD-WAN and so on, and send the traffic directly to the internet using the cheap internet links rather than having to depend on costly MPLS links, right? But doing so also opens up a new problem, which is security, right? Where do you deploy the security? Do you want to deploy it at the branch? Do you want to take a firewall and put it here, right? But then if it is one branch, it is fine. But how do you do it for 10 branches or 20 or 50, right? It's probably going to be a headache for operators to maintain all these firewalls, do the software upgrades, patch them, and so on. So that's where Umbrella comes into play, or that's where the industry standard term SIG comes into play, right? Secure Internet Gateway. So all these applications which you're trying to access via the internet, what Umbrella tries to do is it tries to give you that cloud security solution up here on the cloud. You don't have to worry about the infra. You just come down, you just provision Umbrella within 30 minutes. You get access to all the features up there, right? You can do your DLP, you can do your web proxy, you can do cloud firewall, everything up there on the cloud, right? So yeah, that's the reason why we want Umbrella. That's basically what Umbrella is, right? It's a cloud security solution. It's a full-fledged cloud security solution, or in other terms, you can call it as a SIG, right? So and this is very much in line to what I was talking earlier with respect to the packages, right? You would have seen, as I was showing you earlier, you saw the DNS packages and SIG packages. So we still have those the DNS. If the organization just needs the DNS security, then you can go for those particular packages. If you want the full-fledged cloud security solution with the proxy and the firewall and everything, then go for the SIG. Great. Okay, what do we talk about next? Okay, now we'll talk about the capabilities a bit in detail later. But before we venture into Umbrella, I just wanted to call out some of the important capabilities, right? In fact, let me just erase this. Let me just actually mention it as Umbrella, because that is what we are calling it. We are no longer calling it as OpenDNS, right? Okay, so when you talk about capabilities, right, the first thing is you've got your DNS protection, right? You've got your DNS security as it was being delivered before. You still have it. They have not removed it. Obviously, DNS is pretty important, because any endpoint, when it has to talk to a website, it has to talk to a web app. The very first thing it's going to do is do a DNS request, right? So there are like probably 70 to 80% of attacks which can be kind of prevented by doing a very good DNS inspection, right? So that's still there, right? The second important feature is basically, or the capability is your SWG, which is the Secure Web Gateway. This is something new which has come up in the last one and a half year probably, right? Secure Web Gateway. It's basically a proxy, right? Nothing very fancy. I mean, it's a typical proxy. Obviously, the way Umbrella does it, and the features it provides obviously are pretty nice. But if you want to compare it with industry standard term, it's a proxy, right? It's a web proxy, as simple as that. So with the Secure Web Gateway, you're able to now proxy the entire traffic, right? And you can put in your policies, and you can implement security with the proxy. The next is a firewall, right? You have a typical firewall. So the proxy is mainly for your web traffic, right? The second one which I mentioned here, SWG, is mainly for your web traffic, which is what? Port 80 and 443, right? HTTP, HTTPS. Firewall, the cloud firewall capability will give you the protection at all the other protocols, not just TCP at 8443, but the other protocols, right? The other protocols running on different other ports, custom ports and so on, right? And it gives you right from layer 3 to layer 7 protection. Like you want to block, torrent, you can do it with just a couple of clicks. You want to block Facebook, you can do it, right? So yeah, that's about the cloud firewall capability, right? Then we've got CASB, right? So the CASB is, I think you probably can go back to my channel and check out. I have a video on CASB. So it's basically your security broker, cloud access security broker, right? It basically gives you features with respect to how your users are connecting or accessing some of the SaaS applications, and it also gives you things like application security and so on. So CASB is actually delivered as part of CloudLock. CloudLock is another product that's called as a sister product of Umbrella. But I think over the last couple of years, what they are trying to do is they're trying to get some of those capabilities into Umbrella. So you have some features like app discovery and so on. It's probably not there yet. It's not completely onboarded, but there are a lot of features from CASB which are getting into Umbrella or into the SIG to make like SIG to be one of the single stop for everything related to cloud security, right? And then obviously you have the other one, you might have seen me talk about this in the previous lab videos as well, the investigate, right? The investigate is basically nothing but it's your threat intel, right? Threat intelligence. Basically you can use APIs and so on, and you can make an API call to Umbrella and you can ask Umbrella, hey, what do you think about this URL? Is it malicious or not? Because the good thing about Umbrella is that I think that really connects to, or when we talk about DNS security, the good thing about Umbrella is that it's not just technically, I mean, anyone, even if you're not a paid customer of Umbrella, right, you can technically take your laptop and point it to the Umbrella DNS servers, right, DNS recursive servers. You probably will not get all this protection, all these capabilities which we talked about, but you will get some very minimal DNS protection, right? You will not be able to deploy policies, obviously, if you're not a customer of Umbrella, because you'll then not have access to the dashboard and so on. But at the same time, the minimal, what is the minimal you can get? You can take your laptop and you can point it to the DNS Umbrella DNS servers. What you would basically end up getting is that you'll get that intelligence, or you'll get that DNS intelligence. And what is that intelligence? It's nothing but, at the end of the day, we have probably like, I don't know, maybe more than 100 million and users, and more than probably 10-20 billion DNS requests, I think, every day hitting Umbrella. So you have a lot of this intellectual capital, right? So Umbrella does a lot of data processing, does a lot of data analytics to figure out which are malicious domains and which are not. So even if you're using the very basic, without any, if you're using if you're just pointing your laptop to the DNS server or Umbrella DNS server, it still will provide you that capability, and it will tell you, look, this is a malicious website, so it will not resolve to it, or it will basically kind of drop the connection, right? It will not do the host name to IP resolution because it's a malicious website, right? And that intelligence is available because of the huge amount of DNS requests it sees on a day-to-day basis, and the huge amount of machine learning and data analytics that goes in the background. It is able to kind of give you that information. And the investigate is basically on-demand way of accessing that intelligence, right? You can use an API, you can use the Umbrella dashboard as well, and go and ask Umbrella, hey, what do you think about this particular URL, right? So it helps you kind of technically, it's literally, it helps you to investigate bad domains and so on, right? So these are some of the capabilities. I mean, there are many more as well. I mean, if you want to double click, we can also talk about DLP and so on, but some of the top capabilities when you talk about Umbrella, right, these are the ones. When I just wanted to list them, we will talk in detail in a minute, but I just wanted to list them because what we are going to talk about next is, I want to talk about the components of Umbrella. Alright, Actually, before we get to the components of Umbrella, let me actually talk about two important things, right? One is deployment. Let me just use two different colors. Deployment, and the other one is identities. What are these two things? These two things are super important when you talk about Umbrella, right? And what are these though? Let me take you to the documentation again. Okay, so on the documentation you'll find, you can just do a search, but I've just pulled up the links already here. So, where's the deployment? Okay, not that. Okay, there you go, right? So you'll basically find in the SIG documentation under get started, right? You'll find a section called as Umbrella deployments, right? And you have a very nice fine table here, right? I actually wanted to talk about those capabilities before we get here because, now you can relate to those things, right? So you see, what is this table actually talking about? It basically talks about the different ways you can deploy Umbrella, right? There are quite a lot of ways. As you see here on the left hand side, you have quite a lot of ways you can deploy Umbrella. And on the right hand side, what they have done is they have mapped the capabilities, right, which we talked about, like things like DNS layer protection, secure web gateway, cloud firewall, and so on. So they have kind of called out those capabilities on the right hand side, and they're telling which capabilities are available to you depending on your deployment, right? So these things might look a bit new to you, but technically they're actually pretty straightforward, guys. So what's happening is when they're talking about network, what do they mean, right? The network is nothing but the whole idea of Umbrella is that it is going to provide you cloud security, right? But how does it provide you cloud security? One of the most important prerequisite is that you have to somehow redirect your traffic, your organization's traffic, all the way to the Umbrella cloud, right? That's the basic prerequisite, right? Now there are different ways to do that, right? There are quite a lot of ways to do it. Now, one thing is obviously network. So in network, what you really do is you basically use, or you basically point your DNS, right? You basically point your all the DNS, you basically point your DNS to the Umbrella DNS, right? There are different ways to it. We'll talk about it in a minute, but as simple as that, right? So you have a DNS request. Imagine you have an employee inside your branch office or your campus or your organization who is trying to access a particular website. The very first thing he or she is going to do is do a DNS request, right? So if you can point that DNS request to Umbrella rather than to any of your other DNS servers, either cloud or on-prem, instead of doing that, if you can point it somehow to the Umbrella DNS server, that's it. Once Umbrella sees the DNS server, it can act on it, right? Once it can see all those DNS requests, it can act on it, right? So you just need to tell Umbrella about the network from which this DNS requests are gonna arise from, right? The public IP, right? Every organization will have a public IP, right, at the end of the day. So that's basically your network. Network devices basically, if you use some of the Cisco's products, right, say like Viptela and so on, not just Viptela, anything technically, most of the Cisco products like firewalls and routers and switches and WLCs, and most of these products have integrations with Umbrella, which means you can actually, within like few lines of codes or within few lines of configuration, you can actually direct or redirect all the DNS requests and all, subsequent, if you want maybe web traffic and so on, you can direct it. In fact, you see for network device, I think they have checked up only DNS, so you can only redirect the DNS all the way to the Umbrella, using probably just couple of clicks, couple of lines of configurations, right? So this is relating to that. Then you have the roaming clients, right? We'll talk about roaming clients, but if you have used things like Anyconnect, right, you will understand basically. If you have things like roaming enabled on the Anyconnect, then you will be able to again redirect the traffic to Umbrella cloud, right? And then you see there are certain they have also mentioned iOS and Android apps which are available as well, because when you think of an organization, you're going to have users using their phones, you're going to have them using their laptops, you're going to have them using Chromebooks and so on. So there are ways to direct traffic from all these various from all these various deployments, right, all the way to the umbrella. Virtual appliance, right? This is something which I'll talk about in a minute, but yeah, virtual appliance is another way to kind of send the traffic to umbrella. Then you have pack file, proxy chaining. Proxy chaining is nothing but if you already are using some kind of a proxy inside the org, then you can basically chain it with the umbrella as well, right? IPsec tunnel, basically set up a tunnel from your edge device to umbrella, and then all the traffic which is going on that tunnel can be protected using umbrella security or cloud security. And then you have the final Anyconnect, right? So this is the Anyconnect, this is the roaming module inside Anyconnect, whereas this one is a standalone client as well. But this is a very nice chart which gives you, which you can look at and you can understand. If I go with one of this deployment on the left hand side, these are the capabilities which I can get out of it, right? Typically, if you want to do like secure web gateway, and basically if you want to do the proxy and the cloud firewall, you would go with the IPsec tunnel. Typically, I'm not saying everyone has to do it, but typically this is what you would go with, right? For that, I mean, there are obviously new features coming in day and day out. As you see here, they have also enabled secure web gateway for the Anyconnect roaming security model as well. But typically you would do, or is the simplest way of doing, is just pin up a IPsec tunnel, and all the traffic coming on that tunnel you can proxy it, and you can also subject it to cloud firewall. We'll talk about this, but typically you do that. And the other one for DNS, I think you would do just by pointing your network, adding your network on the umbrella dashboard, right? So that umbrella sees all the DNS requests from that. So that's a quick thing. So that is about deployments, right? So deployments, this is what I meant by deployments. The second thing which I also, as I mentioned on my whiteboard, was identities. And this is another link which I've picked up. You can see on the left hand side, just click on manage identities, go to the last section, and here they have mentioned, or they have put together all the various identities, right? As they mentioned very clearly here, umbrella identity, right, is basically how umbrella sees a particular, it can be anything. Identity can be just a network, right? Or it also has provision to drill down to a particular user as well, right? Or a user group which appears on your Active Directory. So there is capability to get to that level of granularity as well. It can be just a network. When you say network, it's IP address, right? It can either look at all the traffic coming from one particular IP, and it can do access control based on it, or it can even drill down to the level of a user and a Active Directory group, right? And there are quite a lot of other things as well, as you see here. And again, this is a very good chart. I pulled this up because it kind of gives you a mapping about, if you go with a particular deployment, if you go with the IPsec tunnel kind of a deployment, then you would basically end up getting these two kind of identities, right? So if you go for any Anyconnect roaming, and these are the identities which are available. So these two charts, I just wanted to flash it up for you guys to give you an understanding of what do you mean by deployment and what you mean by identity, right? Now, how is this very relevant? This is very relevant because this is how you, at the end of the day, cloud, when you talk about cloud security, what is the most important piece of it, right? It's all about creating those policies on the cloud, right? Creating those DNS policies, those firewall policies, those web policies, which we did actually in the previous lab video, right? We have extensively done those policies. But how do you create those policies? To create those policies, you need to have some kind of identity, right? Like basically think of the analogy of .1x or MAB, right? You have those authentication policies, you've got those authorization policies, but when you create these policies, you need some kind of an identity. You need to tell that, okay, look, traffic coming from this particular switch, traffic coming from this particular NAD, right? And it is if the traffic belonging to, or traffic coming from a particular user, I'm going to provide this access, right? I'm going to provide access to the network. So something very similar to that. To create the policy, you need identities, right? So that is the reason why the type of deployment and the type of identity being used kind of is very important, right? So yeah, just to give you that. Now let's move on to the components. All right, so when I talk about components, let me again go back to my whiteboard, probably pick up a new page here. All right, so components. So let's talk about this like as it's a story, right? So let's go to components. Okay, so when you talk about components, I mean, these are technically not umbrella components. I mean, you will not find this in any documentation, but I like to call this as components because these are some of those pieces of the puzzle which are obviously not mandatory, right? But it's good to know to understand the various options which you have to deploy umbrella, right? And I want to cover this way ahead before getting to the use cases of umbrella, because these will be referenced in the use cases here and there, and it's very good to have an idea of what this is. I will obviously not get very much detail into how to deploy them each and everything, because you have nice documentation for it, but I just want to call them out and put it in one place so that you understand that these are certain things, or these are certain pieces of the puzzle, right, to which can help you with your deployments. Very first thing is your virtual appliance. Right? Now, what's virtual appliance is typically, like I said, right, one of the simplest umbrella deployment will be what? Take your laptop, right? I mean, what we want to protect at the end of the day, we want to protect the user who is using this laptop, right? What would you do? You've got your umbrella here, right? This is the umbrella cloud, right? So you've got the umbrella here. All you have to do is you have to point this guy to use the umbrella as the DNS server, right? Umbrella's DNS IPs, I mean, you have some fixed IPs. It's something like 206.67.220.220 and so on. So you have a couple of IP addresses, right? Anycast IPs. So technically I can go inside the configuration of this laptop and I can put that DNS IP addresses, and all the traffic will start flowing to umbrella, right? I can do this if it's just one laptop and two laptops, right? Actually I can do this for any number of laptops, but what is the problem here? The problem here is, if this is your organization, typically what will you have? You'll have, at the end of the day, you'll have an edge device, right? You'll either have it as a router, or you can be a firewall, whatever it is, but you'll have an edge device which will then pair with the ISP, and the traffic will finally hit umbrella, which is sitting on the internet. It's cloud, right? So umbrella is sitting on the internet. But in your organization, you'll typically have a router or a firewall which will be your edge device, right? So as a result, when umbrella is looking at the DNS request, what is going to happen? If you have another laptop here, right, the DNS request which is coming from there also will go through the same thing, and will probably get natted out. And when it goes to umbrella, the umbrella just sees this particular IP which is here, right? It could be a public IP, but at the same time, umbrella just sees that IP address, right? Now you can obviously take that IP. Let's take some random IP, for example, 49.1.1.1, right? Imagine that's the public IP. You can obviously take that IP and put it on umbrella, and you can say, look, this is my organization, and this is the network identity which I was talking about in the previous one, right? So this one, let's go back here. Remember we talked about the network identity, that is what I meant, right? So I can typically just take 49.1.1.1 and go and call it out as a network identity on umbrella, and I can tell umbrella, look, any traffic coming from this one, let's go and apply this policy, right? But the problem here is that you are not getting any granularity, right? Because then this particular laptop or this particular user and this particular user, both of them will be subjected to the same type of policy, because both the traffic or both the flows are going through the same edge device via the same external IP address, and umbrella will not be able to distinguish it, right? So that's where the VA comes into play, right? So with VA, what you really do is, it's nothing but actually VM, right? We will not get into how this VA, we will not get into how to install it and so on, right? You have nice documentation for that, but I just want to give you a quick idea of what it really does, right? So with what typically you do is, in this very same example which I was talking about, you still have the laptop, right? And you still have your umbrella here, right? What you do is you go and put this VA in between. It's a VM, right? You just deploy it here. You will also have generally what? You will have your local DNS as well, correct? Why do you want this local DNS? The local DNS server you need to resolve some of your internal domains, correct? You might have some, because you are an organization, you will have some internal local DNS server, right, which will resolve all your internal domains, right? If your domain is example.com, then you will have a DNS server which will resolve things like mail.example.com, right, or printer.example.com, whatever, some of the internal domains. You wouldn't want to send those domains all the way to Umbrella, right? Because then Umbrella would not be able to resolve them, because Umbrella doesn't know about your internal domains, right? All Umbrella can provide you is protection against the internet domains. So what you do really is you take the VA, which is a VM, right? It's nothing but, in technical terms, you just call it as a DNS forwarder. So it's nothing but a DNS forwarder. So you deploy this VA, and what you do right now is you take your endpoint, which is a laptop or your phone or whatever your endpoint, you point it to the VA. The VA will be pointed to the Umbrella, right? Or the VA will be able to communicate to Umbrella. At the same time, the VA also will know about what? The local DNS server as well. So what it is going to do is intelligently, if there is a DNS request coming from here for some internal resource, it will send it down here, local, right? If there is a internet bound domain, right, if it is not a local domain, if it's an internet domain, then it will send it all the way here. And that configuration, you obviously do it on Umbrella. On Umbrella, you can go and set certain domains as your internal domains, because otherwise the VA will not understand what is your internal domain, right? Your internal domain could be example.com. So you can go to Umbrella, and on the dashboard you can mention, hey, you know what, this is my internal domain, which is example.com. So the next time the VA sees a request for example.com, it will not send it to Umbrella, rather, it will send it down south, right? Now that's one thing, but what is the main use of this is, because you have put a VA now, what is the extra visibility you're getting? The extra visibility you're getting is, you're getting to know what is the internal IP. 10.1.1. Imagine this particular laptop has an internal IP of 10.1.1. Now what can my VA do? Because my VA is sitting in the path over here before the traffic is natted out, right? Imagine the traffic is getting natted out after this. Before the traffic is natted out, my VA has visibility to the internal IP, right? So that's pretty useful, right? Because now what I can do is, instead of putting one single policy, which I did in my previous case, right, I had just one policy for multiple users because all of them were behind the same NAT. Now because we have VA here, the VA does something interesting. Okay, what does it do? Actually, before telling you what it does, let me actually introduce the second component as well, right? The second component which I wanted to talk about is the AD integration, or the AD connected service, but for simplicity I'm just going to mention it as AD. What is AD? Active Directory, right? In simple terms, you would have seen me use ADs in some of my labs before, but in simple terms, what is AD? It's just a bunch of, it's just a database of usernames and passwords, right? It basically it's one place where you create your users. As new employees, new users come into your organization, you create accounts for them, so that these accounts can then be used for all the other authentication purposes, right? That's just AD. Okay. So now how does all of this come into play? So with Umbrella, what you do is, we have something called the AD connector, right? So I like to call this as a component of Umbrella, because what AD connector does is, AD connector basically syncs all the all the various users which are part of that particular AD to Umbrella Cloud, right? By doing this, what you're doing is, you're no longer, but you're basically telling Umbrella, look, these are the users who are present in my organization. By doing that, now Umbrella will be able to deploy those granular policies, right? If Tom is one user and say Jerry is the other user, right? Now Umbrella can deploy policies based on this granular information, right? For Tom, it can give a particular policy. For Jerry, it can give a different kind of policy. It can exert, or it can it can basically deploy a different kind of policy, right? So that's the reason. So the AD connector is all about, it basically syncs all the AD usernames, or basically not just usernames, right? The users and the groups, basically all the information from the AD which is useful, it basically syncs it all the way to the cloud. or on the umbrella. Not the passwords, obviously, just the list of users and the groups to which those users are part of, and you have knobs to figure out what you want to sync. But yeah, that's basically what it does. It syncs that information. Now, how all of this comes together, right? We talked about VA. We have put the VA. The VA has visibility to the internal IP, correct? And because of the AD connector, the umbrella also is able to understand now that, look, there are two users in this organization. One is Tom and the other one is Jerry, right? Now, the other thing which the AD connector also does is, let's actually play this out, right? Let's say Tom comes in the morning and is logging into the laptop, is sipping some coffee, right? It's putting in the authentication, is logging in. So as soon as he's logging in, what is going to happen is on the AD, there will be some kind of events generated, right? On the Active Directory, there will be some events. The events will be something like, look, there is a user login, there is a device login, right? So this AD connector which is sitting, it's nothing but an application, right? The AD connector, and the application doesn't even have to sit on the AD. It can sit anywhere. It just needs access to the AD. That's it, right? But the AD connector, what it does is it continuously monitors. So as soon as it sees that Tom is logged in, right, it will see that Tom is logged in at the username 10.1.1. Okay. So this mapping or this information is sent all the way to the VA, right? So the AD connector will send this information all the way to VA. At the same time, VA also, because when it is getting a DNS request, what it is having, it has the from address of the DNS request, correct? It knows that Tom wants to probably check out the latest NBA score. So he is trying to open NBA.com, right? So the DNS request, which is originating from Tom's laptop, is hitting the VA, and the VA has visibility that, look, the request is coming from 10.1.1, and my AD connector is telling me that 10.1.1, the user is Tom, right? So now what it is going to do is, you might have heard of this before, but instead of a normal DNS request, right? Because the DNS request, nba.com is not an internal domain. It is sitting somewhere in the internet, so the DNS request has to be forwarded to the umbrella. But when it is forwarding it, it will send this information to umbrella. It will tell that, look, the DNS request is for nba.com, but it is coming from Tom. And how does it do this? It does this using what we call as extended DNS, right? Wherein you can pad some information, some extra attribute, and you can send it along the way. So now umbrella basically has visibility that, look, this request is coming from Tom, right? And because Tom is part of the organization, because we have already synced the users and groups here, we might have created a policy for Tom, right? We want to allow Tom to check his NBA score, right? So we will allow that request, and that's how the request is going to flow around, right? Imagine Jerry comes into the similar scenario, but he is accessing a website which is not supposed to be accessed, right? So in that case, when Jerry's request hits umbrella, we can deny that request. Not just the policies, right? Even imagine things like, because of the intelligence which is built into umbrella, if there is a request which is going to a malicious website, I can actually block it, right? But the main thing which I wanted to bring this out here is how the VA and the Active Directory, how they combine well, right? And they're able to give you this granularity. Earlier we just had one identity, which was just network, right? We talked about just network, but now, because of this, because of the AD, now what you can do is you can get granular. You can create your policies because you have granular visibility as to who the user is who is trying to access a particular resource on the internet. All right, so let me just clean this up one sec. All right, the third interesting component which I want to talk about is roaming. The roaming clients, actually, right? So when you talk about roaming clients, again, what are we trying to do here? with the whole components, what are we trying to do? We are trying to redirect the traffic all the way to Umbrella. At the same time, provide some kind of, information to Umbrella, which will help Umbrella to kind of create some interesting policies for us, right? Provide some information in terms of identities. Tell Umbrella who I am, so that then, it can deploy the right policies for us. So that's what we are trying to do. So with roaming, what we are trying to do is, right, roaming is trying to solve that problem where users are, because nowadays we are all working from home because of the pandemic. The users are not going to be just on campus, right? They're going to be all over the place, right? They're probably working from different places off network, right? Some of them might be on network, but off network and so on, right? So how do you give a consistent experience for everyone, right? So that's what we are trying to solve with the roaming client. Whatever we talked about, the VAs and the AD and all of that, is strictly possible if you're all sitting inside the campus, if you're all sitting inside the branch, right? But all those things which we talked about just flies off the window as soon as the user steps out to a cafe. And how do we provide protection? How do we provide the cloud protection when that user is working on a document while sipping coffee from a cafe? Alright, so when you talk about roaming client, there are two options, right? And because it's called as client, it's obviously something which is going to be installed, right? Either on your desktop, your laptop, whatever, right? There are two options though. One is your standalone, and the other one is your Anyconnect, right? So there are two options. But how do they work, right? That's something interesting. How do they actually do the job? And keep in mind, what is our objective? We want the traffic to be directed to or diverted to Umbrella. Okay. So let's talk about the first one, which is the standalone. So in standalone, you have your laptop here, right? And you have installed this client, right? This particular client, which is the standalone client, right? Which is installed on your laptop. Now your laptop will have some kind of DNS configuration on it, right? For now, think of it this way. We have not done any configuration relating to Umbrella on your laptop. It just has its own regular stuff, whatever it is pointing to a particular DNS server. As soon as you install the standalone client, what it will do is, it will basically change that configuration to point to 127.0.0.1, which is the local host, right? So that's something which this guy is going to do. So this particular piece of software which will sit on the laptop will first go and change the DNS configuration or the DNS server to itself, which is 127.0.0.1, right? So now what is going to happen is, any DNS requests which are generated by this particular host, right, will be intercepted by our client, right, which is sitting here, and that will then forward it to Umbrella, right? Once it is forwarded to Umbrella, what are we going to do here? This is where the policies sit, right? We haven't looked at any of the policy, but take my word for it, this is where we configure the policy. So we have successfully taken the traffic and sent it all the way to Umbrella, correct? So that's how simple it is to do it with that's how simple it is to provide protection to users who are probably not even inside the network, right? They are probably outside, right? So here, as you saw, there was no requirement of VA, there was no requirement of AD and so on, right? We were able to do this, right? And there are some advanced features as well, where you can even send the identity and so on, right? You can kind of combine the identity and so on with the DNS request. So I'll not get into that, but just wanted to give you a quick idea about how you can use the standalone client, how it works internally, right? It goes and listens to, it basically changes the DNS configuration and then intercepts all the DNS requests coming from from the particular host, because it has just changed it to the local host, right? And then it will take it and forward it to the actual Umbrella recursive service. Cool. The second thing is, the other thing is, you might ask a question, how do I deploy this? There's obviously typical manual way of deploying it. You just download the client from the Umbrella dashboard and double click it and install it, right? Either on your MacBooks or on your Windows desktops or laptops, but there are also kind of automations which you can do here, right? Mass deployment you can do, because you might have 50, 60 or 100, 2000, 3000, any number of employees in your company, and you would want to deploy these agents on all of them. So in that case, you can use the Windows GPO based deployment. So you can do it all of that within like few clicks. You don't really have to struggle to do that, right? So that's mainly that. And the other part is for the Anyconnect, right? Functionality wise, it is going to work. I mean, it's doing the same job, but it doesn't do it exactly the same way the standalone client does. In case of Anyconnect roaming module, what it will do is it basically uses the OS kernel to capture the DNS queries, right? It doesn't have to go and change this whole the DNS server configuration and intercept and all of that. Rather, it just uses at the OS kernel level, it looks at the DNS queries and it then forwards it to Umbrella and gives you the DNS resolutions and makes the connection with the particular website, right? So this is much simpler, probably with less overhead. This will be a bit little overhead, but if you don't have an Anyconnect license, if you're not using Anyconnect for your VPN and so on, then you can go with standalone. If you're already using Anyconnect because you're using, say, Cisco's VPNs and so on, then you can add this roaming as just one module, right? You can add it to the profile and it will just show up on the Anyconnect client itself, right? So while we are on this topic of Anyconnect, let me actually go and quickly add one more piece here, which is the SWG agent, right? And it is very much related to, let me probably use a color to kind of, it's very much related to again your Anyconnect, right? The SWG agent, whenever you hear the word SWG, the very first thing which you need to think of is it is a proxy. It's a secure web gateway. It stands for secure web gateway, but it's technically a proxy, right? It's a proxy sitting somewhere on in Umbrella data centers, right? And like I said, this is a web proxy, right? So because the customers were not just happy with having DNS security, they wanted something more. They wanted a full-fledged cloud security solution. So the very next thing Cisco did was they came out with SWG, Secure Web Gateway. It's a proxy, which means now instead of sending only certain flows to a proxy, which was actually there in Umbrella called a selective proxy before, what they did was, let's provide a full-fledged proxy, which means the whole web traffic, right, which is generated out of this laptop, the whole web traffic can be proxied all the way to the Umbrella. And we'll talk about what is the use of this and so on when we talk about the capabilities, but that is what this is, right? And to do that, you need an agent as well. I mean, again, let me rephrase that. Let's actually go back to this. Let's go back to this table, right? You see here, you have Secure Web Gateway as a capability here on the right hand side, and you can see there are 4 different ways to deploy this, and one of the way is via Anyconnect. As you see here on the last one, there you go. There are 3 other ways to do it, right? You can do it using IPsec tunnels, PAC, and proxy chaining, in which case you don't want the Anyconnect. But if you want to do it via the Anyconnect, then you can do it as well, and it will support it, right? So that's the one which I'm talking about. So for that, you will have to install another module, module with your Anyconnect, right? As you guys probably might know, Anyconnect is like a collection of modules, right? You have the VPN module, you've got the network access module, you've got the roaming, you've got the SWG and so on, and many more as well. You've got the ICE posture. There are a lot of modules which are part of Anyconnect. So SWG, if you want to do the proxy, you want to do the secure web gateway, you might not know exactly what secure web gateway is. Don't worry, I'll talk about it in a minute. But if you want to do that, you can do it using Anyconnect. But that being said, these are the 4. I mean, technically, I did want to also talk a little bit about SAML, which is not a component per se, but it's a technology which can be used in conjunction with the Umbrella. I'll just go and mention it here because that is how I dissected the whole Umbrella solution, right? Like these are all the moving parts which are going to be used in various of our use cases as we talked about it in a minute. But SAML, just to spend a minute on SAML, I think I've pulled up on the Umbrella documentation. You'll find a nice picture, you'll find a nice infographic here talking about this thing. Let me just probably increase the font. Yeah, there you go, right? So what is SAML though? SAML is basically a way of kind of authenticating, right? Without you doing the authentication yourself, right? Might be a bit confusing, but if you look at the diagram here, I think it becomes clear, right? In SAML flow, you generally have two pieces. One is called as the service provider, which is SP, and the other one is the IDP, right? What's really happening is someone sitting within the organization is trying to access a particular website, right? And imagine we have enabled the web proxy, right? Which we'll talk in a minute, like the web proxy which I'm talking about, right? The SWG, right? But we don't want to proxy the traffic from everyone. We want to proxy the traffic from people who have bought the Umbrella subscription, right? So what you need to do is you need to authenticate, right? You need to authenticate that user, whoever is trying to access, whoever is connecting to a proxy, is it a legitimate user, right? So so for that, what you can do is you can implement SAML, and the Umbrella will act as the service provider, and you can connect it to any any IDP, right? On the left hand side, you can see the various IDPs. You have Okta, you have Duo, you have Ping, and so on, many IDPs, right? So what really happens is you make a request, and as you see here, the proxy will basically redirect the browser to the service provider. The service provider requests the SAML authentication request, right? You can see a SAML request coming to the browser. The browser will then redirect to the IDP which is used inside the organization, right? Different organizations will be using different IDPs, right? Duo is one of the Cisco's IDP, but then you might be using Okta, Azure, and different kinds of IDPs. Whichever you want to use, you can continue using it. You can use the existing IDP because all of this happens in SAML 2.0, right? So you can continue using the existing IDP, and as soon as the browser redirect to the IDP will ask for the username, password. It might do like a multi-factor authentication, blah blah, whatever it is, right? You might have the whole SAML workflow. You might have used it a lot in your organization. You might have not concentrated, or you might have not focused on it. But all that URL redirection which happens as soon as you log into an application, very first thing in the morning, that's literally SAML, right? So so you basically the user is challenged, and the user is going to put in the username, password, maybe do the Duo, or maybe do a MFA, and then finally the IDP is going to authenticate the user. The IDP, because IDP internally will be then connected to a Active Directory and so on, right? So using the credentials, the IDP is going to say, hey, you know what, this is a legitimate user, right? He has the right password and he has authenticated via MFA as well, so I'm gonna go and authenticate, right? So the IDP is going to authenticate. Once that authentication is done, the browser will forward that SAML response to the service provider, which is Umbrella in this case, right? So the Umbrella is going to just offload all that authentication requirement to the IDP, and the IDP is just going to reply back saying, look, this is a legitimate user, and you can go and redirect him to the actual, you can actually go about providing your proxy services to this particular user, right? So once that happens, the browser is going to request for the original site, and the proxy is going to be, the policy will be applied, and the traffic will be sent to the actual site, right? So basically, SAML is just a way where you can authenticate users without you really doing the authentication. You can just offload it to the IDP, which is already used by an organization, right? That's as simple as that. I just wanted to call this out because SAML is something which is obviously, it's not something which is something new. It's not definitely new. It's not a feature in Umbrella. It's rather, I would say, it's a piece of a puzzle. Like I was talking about the components, these are all pieces of the puzzle which you need to know, so that later when we talk about the use cases, you will get to know where to use them, right? Where to use SAML, where to use SWG, where to use roaming, and so on, right? So that's all about the components. Let's go to the next part. To the next, let's put up a new sheet here, and this is where we're talking about use cases, right? The very first use case which I want to target, or which I want to talk about, is the DNS use case, the DNS protection in itself, right? So let's mention that DNS protection. What do I actually mean by this, right? DNS protection is as simple as, providing security at the DNS layer, right? We are not doing anything apart from that. I mean, technically that's not true, and I'll get to that, but in its simplest term, it is as simple as telling if a user is trying to access a malicious website, we will not allow that, right? If he is trying to access a good website, then we are going to allow it, right? As simple as that. Now, how do we do it and all of that? Let's dig into it, right, a bit. Not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna get into configurations and very much detail into the policies, but I just want to give you a rough overview of how the funda behind it, how really it works, right? Now, when you talk about deployment, right, I mean, the very first question when you look at this use case, your question would be, okay, look, Joel, I want this use case. I want to protect the DNS requests of the users in my organization. How do I do it? How do I deploy it, right? Obviously, there are, I mean, you can always reference this guide which I showed you earlier. You can always reference the compatibility, as you see here. The DNS layer security, you get it from you get it with all these various deployments, right? So you will have to just figure out what really works for you. But the simplest way, like I said, would be to go with the network, right? The simplest way would be to probably, just I mean, imagine you have a bunch of devices inside your network, right? A bunch of users. So this is your network, and Umbrella is around here. All you need to do is this is going to be the public IP, right? You just need to provide that network identity to Umbrella, so that Umbrella really knows that the request coming from this, say the address is 49.1.1.1, Umbrella knows that all the requests coming from this particular network are going to be a part of this organization, so it can put the corresponding policies, right? Now you can double click on this and do a little more nicely by adding things like VA, right? The component which we talked about earlier, that is how it is fitting the picture, right? By adding a VA, what you will do now is you will get visibility into the internal IPs. Add one more component, which is Active Directory. By doing that Active Directory connector, you will get visibility into who is even generating this DNS request. Is it Tom? Is it Jerry? Right? Now, because you have identities, the policies on your Umbrella becomes more and more granular. It becomes more and more powerful, right? So that's a typical way to deploy it. And obviously, this is what I was talking about was this is for on-network protection. That is, assuming Tom and Jerry are on campus or in a branch office and they want protection. But at the same time, you can also do roaming clients, which I showed a minute ago, right, for off-network protection as well, right? So that will be for off-network protection. Again, pretty simple. I mean, you download the roaming clients from the Umbrella dashboard. You probably need to provide some. I mean, you will find the detailed instructions on how to do it, installation guides. But I'm just giving a quick view, right? You can either go with the Anyconnect or you can go with the standalone clients. You can install them, and then once you install them, they will start talking to Umbrella, right? And all the DNS requests generated from that particular endpoint will be sent to Umbrella. So that's as simple as, I mean, these are just a couple of ways, like I said, but there are different ways to do the deployments. Like you see, you can do it on a network device, you can do it using iOS app, you can do it using Android app, and so on, right? But that's typical way of doing it. Okay, so that being said, now once the request has come to Umbrella, what happens? So what I've done is I've pulled up my own Umbrella account, right, just to show you the policies. So on the left hand side, this is where I was talking about, right? You have let's actually quickly have a look at the Umbrella dashboard, right? This is your default dashboard, right? I myself have not explored each and every piece here, but this is a dashboard which is summarizing all the analysis which Umbrella is doing for you and showing it in one single place. But all your configuration happens on the left hand side, right? So you've got your network, so you have the identities section. So this is the place where you add your network, right? Like I was talking about, right? You mentioned that 49.1.1 over here, right? Similarly, you can actually mention your network devices, right? If you want to do it using SD-WAN and you want to point your firewalls and all to Umbrella, then you can do it here. Roaming computers, so this is where your roaming clients will show up, right? Once they show up, you can use those roaming computers in the identities which will then go inside the policies, right? So you can put a particular policy for roaming client 1 versus some other policy for roaming client 2, right? Mobile devices, Chromebook users, so, and then the network tunnels, right? The IPsec tunnels. You can stitch a IPsec tunnel from your organization all the way to Umbrella, and you can use that as an identity as well. Then the user groups, right? So here you will basically see all the Active Directory integrations which you have done, right? Then you have the configuration, right, section, where like things like, domain management, you mention what domains are part of your organization, right? The internal domains and so on. The internal networks can be mentioned here, right? What are the internal IP subnets which you guys are using, so that the request coming to any of those will not be sent all the way to Umbrella, but rather directed to the local DNS servers. Then you have the SAML configuration which I was talking about, and so on. So this is all the configuration section on the top. Then you have the policy section, right? So you at the bottom you have the policy components. Think of this as just like ACI, right? In ACI, what we do is we create those smaller or think of it as even vManage, right? SD-WAN. We create those feature templates and then you go and attach it to a device template. Very similar to that. You can create your various components here, like what kind of IP signatures, right? You want to create a IPS signature, you can create it. You want to create a destination list. Destination list is basically nothing but a list of IP addresses or URLs you want to block or you want to allow. So all those individual components can be created here, and then you go and attach them to the policies on the top, right? So interesting, my internet is a bit slow, but yeah, so the policies on the top and these are the components. Then you have the reporting section, which is basically nothing but a dashboard to view the reports, the logs. And then the investigate section, which I talked about, was to do a quick search to understand the health of a particular domain, right? So that's mainly it, right? Now, since I was just talking about policies, let's go to DNS policy. Give me a second. Okay, so I've got the policies up here. So with DNS policies, you can actually create, I believe you can create multiple policies, and you'll have to just order them, and it is going to be executed top down, right, in the top down approach. But how do we what is the whole essence of this DNS policy, right? Let's have a quick look. So I'm going to just click on the default policy just to show it to you, but you can actually go and click new policies as well, and we have actually done this in our lab videos, right, in the previous lab videos. But just to give you an essence, right, what does this actually mean? So with DNS policy, how it really works is that, like I said, what's the whole agenda here? We want to filter based on the DNS requests, right? So we have some DNS requests being made to Umbrella. We want to either allow it or don't allow it, right? We want to either resolve it or not resolve it, right? That's the whole predicament. So there is obviously let me actually, give me a second, let me just, or I'll use the whiteboard in a minute, but before that, yeah, so this is purely the DNS policy, right? But even before the DNS policy, what is going to happen is, like I mentioned earlier, Umbrella has this huge amount of intelligence, right? Because it sees so many DNS requests on a day-to-day basis. So it can make a decision if it can make a decision that particular URL or that particular host name what you're trying to resolve is malicious, right? Then obviously it is what is called as a malicious request, right? So it will reply back with a block page, right? So when you're trying to access that particular website, it would end up, you would basically get a block page, and we have seen that in our lab videos, right? If it's a safe request, it is going to allow it, but then when I say allow it, I mean it will start processing the policy, right? Because you have put some deliberate policies here, right? And what are those policies? With that policy, what you can do is you have controls, you have those security controls. As you see here on the top, you can do some content filtering, right? You can and there are some application settings as well. So what you can do is under each of these settings, you can go and you can kind of block, right, certain applications. You don't want users to access Facebook. You don't want users to access certain certain type of content, right? Like maybe like gambling websites or porn websites and so on. So all those controls can be done here, and that is, again, that is the policy, that is the security piece which the DNS protection brings to the table, right? So there is that default intelligence which is going to act at the start, but after that there is going to be this policy, and you can see the policy has a lot of other things as well, right? You can there is a destination list as well. You can explicitly mention certain URLs and domains which you want to block using the destination list, right? So you have that kind of flexibility. All right, now where it gets really interesting is under this advanced settings, right? Under this advanced setting, there is a section called as enable intelligent proxy, right? Or people also call this as a selective proxy, right? So what this really does is, I mean, you don't really want to proxy all the traffic, correct? Because, I mean, if you already know that particular website, or if it's something like google.com, right? We all know google.com is a legitimate website. You don't want to proxy it. You want to always proxy certain websites only when you're suspicious of it, right? And what do we achieve by proxying, right? What are we trying to do with proxying? So in proxying, you have the same thing, right? You have the laptops or the users on the left side, you have the umbrella, and then you obviously have this malicious website, right, sitting here, right? So you have a malicious website. You don't want your user to directly connect to this, right? You don't want this. Why? Because by doing that, you would basically end up infecting that user, right? So to kind of prevent this, what you do is with the proxy, so what you do is you have something called as a selective proxy sitting here in umbrella, right? So the umbrella will intercept your request, right? So let's walk through this, right? So say you're trying to access a website called as, I don't know, maybe abc.com, right? And umbrella has categorized this abc.com as a malicious website, right? It's malicious. Maybe it is hosting some malicious content and so on. So it has categorized this website as risky, right? Not malicious, because if it is malicious, then it is going to return back with a block page, right? It is going to reply back with a block page. But in this case, it is categorized it as risky because it doesn't really know, right? Or in fact, let's take a real example. Why are we taking ABC? Like, let's take a real example, something like Reddit. I think all of us use Reddit, right? Now reddit.com is technically it is safe, but at the same time, maybe a subreddit might not be safe, right? Maybe a subreddit on, I don't know, maybe sports might not be safe. Why? Because in Reddit, users are going to upload content, right? Users can upload anything. So when you have such kind of a website, what really happens is you need to you can't trust all the URLs pertaining to that particular domain, right? So in such a use case, what you really need to do is you need to proxy this. So what really happens is that this umbrella, right, acts like a protective older brother, and he's going to reply back not with the IP address of Reddit, right? Or in fact, not with the IP address of Reddit. Rather, it will reply back with the IP address of its proxy, right? Say the proxy, I don't know, maybe something like 146.1.1.1. So it is going to reply back with that. And this particular user who is sitting here will actually try to connect to this particular IP address, because it thinks that reddit.com/sports is sitting on this particular website, 146.1.1.1, right? So it will create a proxy. It will try to connect to the proxy. Proxy, what it is going to do is, proxy is a safe place because it is sitting inside umbrella. But then proxy on the behalf of the user will generate that request to the gray website, right, or the risky website. We don't know if it might be malicious, it might not be malicious. But it is going to generate that request, and it is going to get the response, and it is going to validate. It is, if you're trying to download a file, it will probably use the antivirus engine, which is the AMP engine, right? Similarly, it will try to validate, it will use some engines, it will try to validate if this request and this particular malicious website, is it fine, is it risky, or if it's fine, right? If it is risky, if it is malicious, then it is obviously going to give you a block page. If it is fine, then it is going to reflect that or mirror that or render that request, right? So that's the use of the proxy, and that's the use of what we call as a selective proxy in DNS filtering, right? So you have something called as a selective proxy, because why is it called selective? Because it doesn't proxy all the traffic. It just proxies only those domains and those requests which it thinks to be risky, right? So yeah, that's mainly that. And you can enable that, and subsequently you want to proxy HTTPS traffic, then you'll have to enable SSL decryption, because I think it's very self-explanatory. You can't proxy HTTPS traffic without SSL decryption, right? You will also need the root certificate to be imported in your user machine. But yeah, there's IP layer enforcement as well. This is nothing but technically a list of IP addresses which Cisco security team thinks is malicious. So those, if you enable this, that list of IP addresses will be sent to your roaming computers, as you see here, to the roaming computer identities, and the Anyconnect agents and the roaming clients which are sitting on your laptop will block that request from even initiating, because this is mainly to prevent those cases where if the malware is sitting on your laptop and it is trying to access something on the internet, but it is not accessing the DNS, rather it is trying to access the IP directly, right? So how do you protect that? You can do it using IP layer enforcement, safe search, and so on. These are some interesting features. I'm not getting to each of those, but that's mainly the DNS policy, right? Pretty straightforward. So what I'll do is I'll just give me a second. Okay, let's try to just put a small diagram going here, because at the end of this discussion we can then kind of like try to compare everything what we talked about, right? So let's get rid of that. In the diagram, in the sense, what are we trying to access finally? We are trying to access the internet, correct? And what do we have on the left hand side? So these are the use cases. So you have the DNS traffic, right? So the DNS traffic, where it is going to be sent, it will be sent to the umbrella, right? It will be sent to the umbrella resolvers or the recursive resolvers, right? And we talked about there is a bit of proxying which happens here. There is no capability to proxy all the DNS traffic. It is only what we call as selective, right? Or in other terms, you also call it as intelligent proxy, right? So that is the only capability, and this is literally what we call as the DNS protection. So we talked about how you can deploy it, what are the policies you need to use for protecting your network against these DNS related attacks, right? And how does it actually happen in the background, right? So that's what we talked about. All right, so the next one we want to talk about is it's one of my favorite and one of the recent most features, which is the SWG. Okay, secure web gateway, basically the proxy, right? Now just to give you an understanding, what is a proxy, right? So proxy is basically let's again talk about the older traditional way, right? You used to have a laptop here, right? And you used to have a web proxy generally here. This is the place where the web proxy used to sit in your network, right? And then probably you had a firewall, right, over here, and then router, and maybe it went to the internet over here, right? That's how, and then finally it went to the web server you're trying to access, right? Maybe HTTP or PS or whatever, right? So this is how it used to be, right? So the web proxy used to sit here. It's basically nothing but think of it as a server, right, which acts as an intermediary between the client and the resources you're trying to access, right? And generally when you talk about, you can have proxies for different protocols, but we are mainly talking about the web proxy, right? So it basically proxies, or whenever it sees a web traffic on port 80 or 443, what it ends up doing is it will kind of look at the request coming in, and it will generate its own request all the way to the web server, right? And once it gets the response, it will look at the response, it will probably investigate it, and then if it is all fine, if it's all safe, then it will forward the response back to the client, right? All of this is done because you want to keep the network safe, right? So that you don't infect your user with some kind of malware and so on, right? So that's the main reason. But this is what we used to have. But with case of Umbrella, what they have done, they have taken this whole piece and they have put it where this is just internet, but I'm just assuming you understand by now that Umbrella sits on the internet, right? So they have taken this whole proxy and they have put it or bundled it inside the Umbrella, right? So to give the whole proxy capabilities for the users who are using the cloud security solution, right? Now the main difference here is that, or the main advantage or the difference, let's say difference between the use case number 1 and 2 is that in use case 1 we were just looking at the DNS request. In use case 2 we are looking at the entire web traffic, right? Everything that runs on the port 80 and 443, right? Complete HTTP and HTTPS, right? So it's mainly catering to those customers who want a complete visibility. They're just not happy with just the DNS protection, but rather wants to probably tunnel all the, or basically proxy the whole traffic, right? But then by doing this, it opens up a lot of use cases technically, right? It gives you things like, you can now use AMP, right? You can do file analysis, right? Because you can look at the file. What you can do is you can take that file and send it to the AMP cloud and do some kind of you can do some kind of verification if that file is malicious or not, right? You can look at the complete URL, right? Earlier in case of DNS, what we could do was we could just look at the initial URL the user is trying to access, because once that URL is resolved, right, once the host name is resolved, there is no more DNS request, right? The client would directly initiate a connection to the host, to the domain, right? And unless there is selective proxy coming in between, right? Like I said, selective proxy is very minimal, right? Probably for 90 to 95% of the traffic, you would not do selective proxy. Selective proxy is very minimal. Only when Umbrella thinks that a particular URL or particular domain is gray, right? It doesn't really know what to do with it. It goes to selective proxy. But that being said, let's say you're accessing Facebook, you're on a legitimate website, but at the same time, maybe there is some kind of a malware someone has uploaded, right? So you would want a complete URL, kind of map. You would want to understand what did the user access, what did the user click, right? You would want to know the complete URL logging. So that's where, you can do that using proxy, right? Without proxy, you would not be able to do it because the URLs, everything will be encrypted, right? Only when you're able to use a proxy, you can kind of look at what the URLs, basically the complete user activity on a particular website can be mapped and can be recorded if you are using a proxy, right? So then you can do app discovery, right? You can look at what applications the user is using, right? What kind of applications and so on. So everything, everything which you could not do with DNS, you can now do it with the second use case, which is the SWG. How do you deploy it? Like we spoke about the first use case, very similarly, we can talk about the deployments here as well. So if you go to that user guide which we have here, as you see here, the deployments for your secure web gateway, you can do it using the pack file, right? So pack file is technically not a, it's not a good, I wouldn't say, it's actually pack file is more used mainly for testing purposes, right? You want to quickly test it out, you use it, but you wouldn't do it in a production environment, right? So pack file is basically, I think pack stands for proxy autoconfig file, right? So you normally point your browser to this pack file, right? Which is generally on the Umbrella side. And the pack file will basically tell the browser which proxy server it has to use while connecting to a particular URL, right? So you're forcing a particular user to go through a particular proxy, right? It is a manually intensive method because you have to do this on every single laptop, every single client. So you don't really use this in production, but it supports. You can use it mainly for testing purposes. Proxy chaining is a good way where you already have a proxy you are using in your network. You can then use that proxy to forward the traffic to Umbrella, right? So that's a good way of doing it as well. IPsec tunnel is one of the most common way, right? You might have like a edge device, say a CSR device or a ASA firewall or a FTD or a normal router. You can just spin up a IPsec tunnel all the way to Umbrella, and all the traffic which is coming on that tunnel, what you can do? You can send it to the proxy. I mean, when I say all the traffic, I mean web traffic, right? Because the rest of the traffic will actually go to the firewall, which we'll talk next. But all the web traffic, only the web traffic is sent to the proxy, right? And then you can also do it using the Anyconnect, right? In Anyconnect, client, what you can do is just like we spoke about roaming. In fact, we spoke about SWG, right, a minute back. If you go back to our components, see, we spoke about this SWG agent. That's what I'm talking about. So using the SWG agent, which is nothing but part of the Anyconnect modules, you can enable that, and then what it will do is it will redirect all the web traffic to the proxy, right? So the deployments are pretty straightforward. So now if you come back to our this thing, so if you have to just mention those deployments, let's just mention those here. Where are we? So we talked about our DNS, but now we are talking about the full proxy capability. The full proxy, right? Same thing. I mean, on the right hand side it's the internet, right? This is the internet. You still are protecting the traffic going towards the internet, but with this full proxy, what are we getting? Or what are the various deployment or the networks, or what are the various things which what are the various deployment types, right? Like we spoke about, it is IPsec, PAC, and you've got your roaming clients, right? That's one thing. And the last one is probably the proxy chaining, which we just now spoke about, right? So that's all, and all of this, remember, only the web traffic which is coming from here, right? So this was the DNS traffic. All the DNS traffic which is coming, right, is getting redirected. Somehow it is getting redirected using you can do it using network, you can do it using, I mean, all that huge list which we saw. You can redirect all the DNS traffic, from the network deployment, from the IPsec tunnel, from the from the roaming clients and so on. All of those DNS traffic you can redirect to the resolvers, and then you have a bit of selective proxy as a kind of like a, it's not a full-fledged proxy, like it doesn't proxy every single DNS request, but only few DNS requests which are supposed to be risky, it will then subsequently proxy those websites, right? Proxy those corresponding web connections. But in case of full proxy, if you want this capability, what you can do is you can use one of these deployment types, point the traffic using one of these deployment types all the way to the proxy, all the way to SWG, right? And all the traffic will be proxied. And now the policies, we did not talk about the policy. So what are the policies here? The policy which will mainly impact here is the, I think I lost my, let me just log in. Right, so the policies which will really impact your proxy is your web policy, right? You see on the left hand side you have web policy. Now the way they have designed this web policy is very interesting. You can have just only one web policy, but all you can do is you can create multiple rule sets, right? You'll understand this when you play around with it. If you get some hands-on experience, it's pretty simple. We talked about this, we looked at this in our lab as well, but just wanted to point out. So here you can define different rule sets, right? And then inside each rule set you can define rules, right? And you can have multiple rule sets, and it will be all analyzed top down approach, right? Whichever is the first rule which will match the conditions, that particular policy will get applied, right? As simple as that. Okay, so that's the web policy which will get applied for the proxy. All right, I think now we understand the reason why we have this, because we want the full proxy capabilities. The only one thing which I want to touch upon is, remember in the component section we talked about SAML, right? So the SAML is really getting used in this section, which is especially the SWG use case. What you can do is at the end of the day, if you look at it, right, I mean, the proxy service or the SWG is not a free service, right? It's a premium service. It is only obviously provided to customers who buy this particular package which has the SWG. So how do you authenticate? How do you only proxy? Because I mean, to proxy all the web traffic, there will be so much resources which are going to be used or consumed on the Cisco data centers, right? So how do you authenticate users, right? So one way of doing it would be using SAML, right? I mean, you can also do it if you have the if you have a deployment, if you're doing a deployment within the enterprise, you can obviously track the users, or you can authenticate the users using roaming clients. You can authenticate them using the virtual appliance and the AD users groups, which we have already talked about. But another way of authenticating, or kind of making sure that only legitimate users are connecting to the proxy, or they are getting connected to proxy, is using SAML, right? So we saw the workflow of how to use SAML, but using SAML you can kind of like, what you can do is you can, when the user is connecting coming on the browser and connecting to a particular website, what Umbrella would end up doing is it will redirect for a SAML authentication. Once SAML authentication takes place, it will plant a cookie on the browser of the user, and that way, that way Umbrella understands or is able to track who the user is. And once that is done, you can actually use that in the identities, right? So let's see if there is an identity here. So there is security settings. I can actually probably add. So you see there's an identity option here. So I can do add identity, and you can see there should be a section called SAML. Okay, it's not showing up here because I've not done any SAML integration yet. But if you have a SAML integration, you will basically see those SAML users also showing up here, right? So then you can define different rules per different SAML user, right? So if Tom is a user, SAML user, I can basically provide a particular rule for Tom. If for Jerry, I can provide a different, right? But you see how you can use the identities, right? This is what I was talking about earlier. You can use the network as an identity, you can use the tunnels, you can use the AD users and the groups, right, which we integrated using the AD connected earlier, and the roaming computers as well, right? Similarly, you'll also see SAML here if you have the integration enabled. All right, so that's the second use case. I hope I've done justice for that use case. Is there anything else? Yeah, I think that's mainly it, right, with the second use case. All right, so the third one, which is very important, or which is equally important, would be I know this video is probably getting a bit lengthier, but hold on. So the third one is going to be the cloud delivered firewall, right? The CDFW, right? Now, if you look at whatever we have covered till now, we have talked about the DNS traffic. We have talked about with the SWG, we have talked about what? The web traffic. This is mainly web, right? What about the rest of the traffic? When I talk about the rest of traffic, I mean any other protocol, right? Any other protocol, and running on any other port, right? So all of that traffic will be taken care by this particular engine or this particular firewall, right? Or basically, it's called as a firewall because it typically has all the capabilities of a firewall. Like basically, you can block a certain port, you can block a certain IP. It will give you capabilities right from L3 to L7, right? You can even block an application as well. You want to block torrent, you can do that, right? So the cloud delivered firewall is basically more like a catch-all, right? So DNS is done, we have done web traffic. The rest of all the traffic which is going to be there is going to be filtered, or the policies. You want to have some policies for that traffic as well, right? You don't want to allow all the traffic from the users from L3 to L7. You don't want to, if someone is trying to access a particular application running on a non-standard port, and what if that application is hosting a malicious malware, right? So you don't want that to happen. So the CDFW basically takes care of that, right? Now the deployment part, again, we can go back to our table here. The deployment part, you can see for the firewall, I think as of today, the only way to get the firewall capability is only via IPsec tunnel, which means you need to stitch a tunnel from your device, say a router, switch, or any device which is compatible with the IPsec, I think should work. And you should be able to stitch a tunnel from IPsec to Umbrella. It's pretty simple. Within like few clicks you can do it. Once you have that tunnel up, all the traffic coming on the tunnel will get filtered using the firewall. All right. So yeah, that's that. So coming to our diagram, or if you are building this diagram, what do we do now? We can add one more piece here, which is the firewall piece, right? And what is the only way to get there? I think using this one, right? So it's only using the IPsec. You can use the firewall, and you can put the policies, put the firewalling policy. So this one is going to be, web was obviously for SWG, but now for firewalling, it will be all the non-web traffic, right? Basically all the other traffic, apart from DNS, apart from web, all the other traffic will hit the firewall, right? So or will hit the firewall component of Umbrella, right? And you have like I said, capabilities you have right from L3 to L7, right? And where do you see that? You can see that by just going back to the policies. Let's come here, let's go to the firewall policy, right? So there is yeah, there you go, right? So that's the firewall policy. You can see right from here, you can see there is a very typical, right? You can select the applications, you can select the protocol, you can select any IPs, you can select the ports, and you can just allow it or block it, right? And obviously this one, the only identity which you can use here as of now looks like you can use only the IPsec tunnel, but in future they might, you know, they might allow you to even probably use the roaming clients and so on, right? As of today, you have to use IPsec tunnel, send the traffic to Umbrella, and the traffic on that particular tunnel will be then filtered using the policies which you define over here. Okay, so a couple of other small, I would say, I mean other use cases, couple of use cases which I also would like to probably just point out would be DLP, and the other one is CASB, right? I'll not get very detailed into this, but data loss prevention, right? So what you can really do with data loss prevention is actually, technically I would call this data loss prevention as a sub use case of this HWG itself, right? Because you need what we call as the proxy. We need the full proxy capabilities for doing that. But what does it actually mean, data loss prevention? So you see on the left hand side you have the corresponding policies for that, right? So all you need to do is basically create what we call as a data classification sets, right? So the use case here is more like, think about it this way, right? You are let's say you're uploading a document, right? You're uploading a document into a SaaS application, right? And you're not supposed to put in some kind of private information out there, right? Might be something related to your company, might be related to something personal, right? You are not supposed to say put a password, right? And you might just you might end up typing a password on the document and you might just upload it. So in such cases, what you can do is you can use data loss prevention policy, and you can define your classifiers. You can say, look, a password might look like this, right? Or a credit card number might look like this. So what the policy will end up doing is, it will, because you are anyway doing a full proxy, aren't we? We are using a full proxy, so Umbrella is able to see everything. It's able to see its entire packet. It's able to see the whole content of the packet. So as a result, it will do a quick text sweep and it will look for that particular pattern, right? If it finds a pattern, it is going to alert you, telling, hey, look, there is data loss prevention, there is a DLP policy getting violated here. A particular user in your company has uploaded a document which has some secret information, right? So that's a use case. I would say it's a small, I wouldn't call it as a I would call it as a sister use case of your SWG itself, because obviously from the use case itself you can understand that you need a proper decryption, you need HTTPS inspection, so you obviously need a proper full decryption to happen for this use case to be tried on. The last is CASB. CASB is your cloud access security broker, right? So we have talked about this in the previous videos. You can go and check what it really is. But with the Umbrella, what they are trying to do is they are trying to get some of the capabilities of CASB into inside your Umbrella. So what you can do is, probably one of the use cases, if I go to reporting and if I go to say app discovery, right? So this will actually, right now I don't have any data, but technically it will show you the various applications, various SaaS applications which you are kind of using in your network, right? Similarly, DLP technically is actually a use case of CASB itself, right? So some of CASB or Cisco's CloudLock is actually a sister product. It's a different product in itself, but they're trying to get some of the capabilities from there into Umbrella, because then you want to keep Umbrella to be a single cloud security solution, right? So yeah, so those were all the use cases which I wanted to cover. All right, so those are all the use cases I wanted to cover. Before we wind up, I just want to show you one diagram which is very, very useful to understand this whole working of Umbrella, which is this one, right? Again, I'm picking this right from the documentation, right? So the documentation is very great when it comes to Umbrella, right? You can see everything on the left hand side. Whatever we talked about, everything is available here, right? At the top, it talks a little bit about the DNS, then it talks about web, then you have the firewalling, then it talks a little bit about the DLP, right? Then you have a bit about the file analysis, right, which is kind of like a sub, I would say it's a part and parcel of your full proxy capability or the SWG. Then it talks a little bit about how to create the tunnels and the authentication and a bit about the IPS and so on, right? Probably I missed telling you this. The firewalling policy, when we looked at the firewalling policy, let's go back to the firewalling policy. Where is the firewalling policy? So yeah, so in sorry, not that one. So yeah, on the firewalling policy, you see on the right hand side top, you also have the capability of not just doing a firewalling but also IPS, right? And the umbrella IPS, basically it uses the SNOT rules, right? So it has if you have used FTD before, you might, just by looking at this, you will see the similarity, right? You have the same set of IPS signatures right over here. So if you enable IPS, basically it's going to use those SNOT signatures and kind of verify if the traffic is matching any of the signatures. You can also go on the left hand side and create your own signatures as well, right? Just wanted to mention that. That being said, let's come back here to this one last piece, which is kind of giving you a very nice picture of end-to-end whatever we discussed today, right? How all the pieces fit together, right? So on the bottom you have the endpoints and you have the network. You have basically everything what you want to protect, right? You have the network devices, which is like SD-WAN devices. You have your endpoints. You have your maybe your VAs and everything which is sitting inside your environment or inside your organization, right? Everything above this is the umbrella. So you see the very first thing what is going to happen as the traffic hit us, because we looked at these use cases separately, right? We looked at the DNS use case, we looked at the firewall, we looked at the SWG and so on. But umbrella really looks at all of this, in one single shot. Because if you want to connect to a website, right? You want to connect to a website, it might involve all the three policies, right? Because when you want to connect to a website, the very first thing you do is you're going to do DNS resolution, right? Then that particular website might be using some different protocol, right? It might use probably FTP, right? Maybe it might ask you to upload something and it might end up using FTP. So in that case, the firewall will come into play. Then obviously the web traffic will obviously be governed by SWG. So in a particular transaction, it might involve a combination of the capabilities. It might not be just DNS, it might not be just SWG. So this gives you a very good view, right? So as soon as the traffic, the very first thing which is going to happen is DNS, right? So umbrella is going to check its DNS policies and it's going to make sure that the DNS policies are implemented. There might be some domains which might get blocked here itself if you have defined certain policies. If not, the traffic will then obviously once the DNS request has been resolved, assuming that you have enabled full proxy capabilities, then the traffic will hit the firewall, right? So the firewall will basically look at the traffic. If the traffic is a web traffic, it will not do anything. I mean, technically, firewall is, the CDFW is like a parent of the SWG, right? Because the firewall, on the firewall, you can block any protocol, right? Whereas SWG is only for the web, which is port 80 and 443. So assuming that you have not blocked the port 80 and 443 for that particular domain, what is going to happen is the firewall is going to allow that particular traffic to to be then checked against the SWG policies or basically the web policy, because that is the proxy, right? This is the proxy only for web and no other protocol. So the 8443 traffic will come here. The policies are going to be checked against, and if that also permits it, then the traffic will hit the NAT gateway of umbrella and then it is going to hit the internet, right? So that's the whole workflow, right? So there might be cases where the traffic might get dropped at DNS. There might be cases where traffic might get dropped at firewall or at the at the proxy. I mean, when I say dropped, I mean it might get dropped or it might get blocked, depending on the policy, whatever policy you have defined, right? But that's the flow of policies. When you have multiple policies, this is how it is going to umbrella is going to look at your traffic in this way, in this manner, right? It's always DNS first, then you have the firewall, then you have the SWG. Okay, cool. So I think we've covered everything which I wanted to cover. So like I said, this was supposed to be a quick session. It was supposed to be a very quick overview whiteboard session, but I ended up, I think, talking. I mean, I think I can probably talk for another couple more hours because there's so much of content, there's so many of features, but I'll hit a pause here because I think we've touched upon some of the most important things which I wanted to talk about. Just to review, I think first we started talking about why we need Umbrella, right? That was very important. Right. Then we talked a little bit about the capabilities of before we went that we actually talked about the different ways to deploy Umbrella and what do you actually mean by identities. Then we talked about just we called out the various use cases. Then we moved on to the components of Umbrella. Like technically these are not components; these are the various pieces of the puzzle which you really need to understand, because these will be used repeatedly in various use cases, right? So we talked about what is a VA, what is a AD connector, what is a roaming client, what are the two different types. We talked about SWG agent because that's the one which is going to proxy, or that's basically going to redirect all the web traffic to the SWG proxy. Then we talked a bit about SAML. Moved on to the next section, which was talking about the various use cases, the DNS use case, the proxy use case, the firewall use case, DLP, CASB, and on the right hand side we kind of put a quick diagram about how each of these use cases, how do you deploy them, right? And what are the capabilities you get, right? When it comes to DNS, you have, Umbrella just does the resolution, obviously, and you can put the DNS policies here. And on top of that, you can also do selective proxy, right? Only those domains which are risky, you can do a selective proxy. So it's going to be generally a very small percentage, maybe 2-3%. But if the customer is interested with a full proxy solution, then they can use the SWG use case, right? Wherein the whole traffic will be sent to the Umbrella proxy, and you can do everything over there. You can do AMP, you can do antivirus, you can do URL, you can look into the URL, you can look into the user activity, what he is trying to do on that particular website. You can do application discovery and all of those great use cases of SWG, right? Then finally we looked at all the non-web traffic and the non-DNS traffic, which is the leftover traffic. You can also kind of secure that using the firewall, the cloud delivered firewall. And you have typically, for the first one you use DNS policies, for the second one you use the web policy, for this you use the firewalling policy, right? And we also have looked at a quick diagram about how all these three policies fit together, right? How they all kind of like work in tandem, right? So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hope that was useful, and I know it's a bit long, but I'll probably try to put in the sections as well so that you can just view only those sections which interest you. All right, have a good one, stay safe, bye.